Like, hello, teacher, and the next chapter 3, a computer in color.
Chapter 3. A Computer in Colour. Woz had some exciting ideas for the electronics of the Apple II. He had even found a way to show information on the computer screen in colour. It was the first time that anyone had managed to do this.
Chapter 3, a computer in color. How had some exciting idea for electronics of the Apple II. He had even found the way to show information on the computer screen in color. It was the first time that a now and managed to do
Steve
it.
worked on ideas for the computer's case. He also wanted to find a better way to keep the computer cool. Inside most computers, there were noisy machines to do this. He and Woz knew almost nothing about this side of computer design, so they employed someone who did. His name was Rod Holt, and his clever new ideas made computers much quieter. Today, they are almost silent.
Still working on an idea for the computer's case. He also wanted to feel better to keep the computer cool inside most computers where there were noise machine to the disk. He was knew almost nothing about the side of the computer design to the employee some how did his name was a Rod Holt and this clever idea made computers much quieter. Today are almost silent.
Steve and Woz needed someone to put some serious money into the business. Producing the Apple II was going to cost much more than the Apple I. Steve asked a lot of people for money, but he wore old clothes and no shoes to meetings. Everyone said no.
Stephen Boy needs some to put some serious money into the business. Product the Apple II was going to cost much more than the Apple One. Steve asked a lot of people for money, but more all club on the shows, making everyone say no.
Then Steve and Woz met Mike Markula. Mike was only 33, but he had worked at other computer companies and made a lot of money. He thought the Apple II had a big future. He decided to join Apple and put $250,000 into the company.
Then Steve and was make Markle make was only 33 on the half working on the computer companies and made a lot of money and from the Apple II had a before they decide a join Apple put 2,250,000 into the company dollars into the company.
Many of Steve's ideas about business were learnt from Mike. They both believed that it was better to make a few products really well than to make lots of products. They also believed that the presentation of a product was almost as important as the product itself.
Many Steve idea about business were learned from Mike. They both believed that it was better to make a fair product rather than to make lots of product. They also believed the presentation of product was almost as important on the products itself.
Woz finally agreed to leave his job at Hewlett-Packard. A few programmers started working for Apple too, some of them high school students. Everyone had a lot to do before the presentation of the Apple II at the West Coast Computer Fair in San Francisco.
What finally great left the job a health Parker a few programmers started working at the Apple II. So 1999 school student everyone had allowed to do before the presentation of the Apple II on the West Coast Computer Fair in San Francisco.
Steve had learned from his mistake at the last fair. This time, he paid for an area at the front of the hall, and also spent a lot of money to make sure it looked good. When the fair opened in April 1977, the visitors' first sight was of 3 Apple IIs, each in an attractive and simple plastic case. Behind the computers, there was a big picture of an apple in bright colours. Steve and Woz had even agreed to wear suits. Apple looked like the most exciting company at the fair. Everyone wanted to try its amazing new computers with their colour screens.
Steven had learned from the mistake on the last fray. This time they paid for an area at the front on the hall and they also spent a lot of money to make sure it looked good. When the fair opponent in the April 1977 division first again was in the word Apple juice aged in attribute and simple plastic case. Spaghetti cover was a good big picture on the Apple Prince colors. Stephen was had never agreed to wear suits. Apple looked like the most exciting company on the air fair. Everyone wanted to try amazing new components with their colors.
Apple got 300 orders at the fair. It was an even better result than they had hoped for. Soon, software companies produced some great office software for it, and it quickly became the most popular computer in the world.
Apple got 300 orders on the fair and was having a better result when the Hopper for some software company produced some great office software for and quickly became the most popular computer in the world.
It was used not only in offices, but also in some US schools and homes. For many people, it was the first computer that they ever saw. Almost 6 million Apple II computers were sold during the 16 years that it was produced.
It was used in not only the office but also in some USA schools and homes. For many people, it was the first computer that they ever saw. Almost 6 million Apple II computers were sold during the 60 years that it was produced.
By the end of 1977, Apple was a very successful business. It moved out of the Jobs garage and into an office of its own. But Steve was a difficult person to work with. He wanted everything to be perfect. He shouted at the programmers and used a lot of bad language. He told people that their work was terrible when sometimes he just didn't understand it. He still believed that because he ate only fruit, he only had to wash once a week. He smelled really bad.
But the end of the 1967, Apple was a very successful business and moving on the jobs gallery and into an office in its own. But Steve was a difficult person to work with. He wanted everything to be perfect. I shoved it at the program and used it a lot of bad language. The lot of people in there working and terrible when it's something that they use, they understand it. He still believed that because an adult only Freud on the only had to wash on week, his mind really bad.
Mike Markula and Woz decided to employ a new CEO who could manage Steve. They chose Mike Scott.
Mike Harkle and was decided to employ a new CEO. The call managed Steve. Call managed Steve. The chose Mike Scott.
He was a friend of Mike Markula's, and he was as determined as Steve was.
The chose Mike Scott. He was a friend of May Markla. It was determined and Steve was.
He said no to many of Steve's expensive and unnecessary ideas for making a perfect product. For example, the case of the Apple II was a very pale brown. The plastics factory already offered 2,000 pale brown colours, but Steve wanted something new. Mike Scott said that the cost of this was too high. Steve hated him. They shouted and screamed at each other, and sometimes Steve even cried. The Apple office was never a quiet place. Home life was not very quiet for.
He said the money is of Steve expensive and unnecessary that for making a perfect product. For example, the case of the Apple II was a very brown. The plastic factory already offered the 2,000 employees from the colors, but Steve wanted something new. Mike Scott on the calls on the ones tonight, Steve hated him. The shouting and screaming and the edged other and something there even cried. The Apple office was a never good place.
Steve either. He had moved out of his parents' home and was living with Daniel Kotka and Chris Ann Brennan, his girlfriend from high school. Since their school days, Steve and Chris Ann had stayed friends. Now, living in the same house, their relationship started again. Soon, Chris Ann was expecting Steve's baby. They were both 23, the same age that Steve's parents had been when Steve arrived.
Home life was not very quiet for the Steve either. He had moved on the four parent on the was living with Daniel Cook and the Chris R. Brown. His girlfriend from high school, saying their school days, Steve and Chris and the stay friends now living in the same house. Their relationship started going. So Chris and was expected Steve baby. They were both 23. The game's 87 parents have been the Steve arrived.
Steve wasn't ready to be a dad. He decided not to believe Chris Ann. Perhaps he really thought that someone else might be the father, or perhaps he was just lying to himself and his friends. Chris Ann was very angry with him. She moved to the apple farm in Oregon, where she and Steve had spent a lot of time together, and there she had a baby girl. Steve went to meet the baby and gave her a name, Lisa. But then he did nothing to help. He was a rich man now. Chris Ann was very poor, but Steve didn't give any of his money to her and the baby.
It was ready to be a dad. Had decided not about Christian, but they really thought that the son also meant that the father church of the was just living on the hill and on the friends. Chris and was very angry with him to moving to the Apple Farm in Oregon, where she and Steve spent until life together, and there she had a baby girl. Steve wanted to meet the baby gave her a name Lisa, but they had nothing to help with the rich man now. Chris Anna was very poor, but Steve did have the money to the hair and baby.
A few
The
years
baby.
later, Steve did a test to check if he was really Lisa's father. It was quite clear that he was. He then gave Chris Ann a home and paid for a good school for Lisa, but he spent very little time with her. Later in his life, he felt really bad about this.
A few years later, Steve did a test to the chicken. It was really Lisa's father. It was quite clear that it was he didn't have Chris Anna and home and paid to the for good school from Lisa, but spent very little time with her. Later in his life, he felt really bad about this.
At the time, Apple was the only child that Steve was interested in. The Apple II was still selling well, but this couldn't last forever, and everyone knew that Woz, not Steve, had been the main creator of the Apple II. Steve wanted to create a new computer himself, a better computer than any that had come before it. He chose a team of fantastic people and started work on a new computer. Strangely, he called it the Lisa.
At the time, Apple was only just what Steve was interested in. The Apple II wasn't selling well above this call last before, and everyone knew that not Steve had been to the main creator on the Apple II. Steve wanted to create a new computer himself, a better computer than anything to buy the computer for it. He closed a team of fantastic people and started work on the new computer. Starting, he called it at least.
Without Woz's genius, however, things didn't go well at first. So Steve decided that he needed some new ideas. He found them at a big technology company called Xerox. Xerox wanted to buy shares in Apple. Jobs agreed to this, but asked in return to meet the company's computer scientists. When he saw the computers that these scientists had created, he was really excited. To give instructions to computers at that time, you had to use a difficult computer language. But one of the scientists' ideas was something called a mouse. With the mouse, you could choose pictures or words on the screen, and these gave the computer its instructions. It was so easy that a child could do it. Surprisingly, Xerox had no plans to sell computers with these innovations. Steve felt sure that with ideas like these, and design from Apple, the Lisa would be the perfect computer for people's homes.
Well, with house engineer, however, the need to world at first to Steve decided he need some new idea. He worked at a big technology company called Xerox. Xerox wanted the bot sharing Apple Hub upgrade to the bot scarlet in the return they made in the company computer sciences to the walls of the computer and the science and create to the world really existed to the house to the computers and the that time to the how to use difficult computer language but when the science idea was something called a mouse. With the mouse according just pictures a word on the correct and the hardware to the computer instruction and it was too easy that chill accord with certainly zero had no plans at the start computer with the this innovation instead well sure that with idea like this and design from Apple, the list are well to the perfect computer for people homes.
Steve was determined to create something great, but he was rude and unkind to his team at Apple. The shouting and the disagreements never stopped. Finally, Mike Markula and Mike Scott decided that Steve must stop work on the Lisa. Steve was very upset.
It was determined to create something great, but it was right on his time on the Apple. The something and the desire never stopped. Finally, Mike Marcola and Mike Scott decided to the Steve must stop working to Lisa as he was very upset.
He had other things to think about, however. Apple was planning to become a public company.
He was other thing to think about. However, Apple was planning to become a public company.
This meant selling millions of small shares in the company to the public. It was a useful way
He's made selling millions of small shares in company on the public.
to get more money so that the company could grow. The shares went on sale in December 1980, and they were very popular. The price went up and up. When Mike Markula had joined Apple in early 1977, the company was worth $5,309. At the end of 1980, it was worth $1.79 billion. Some people at Apple kept shares for themselves, and 300 people in the company suddenly became millionaires. Steve, at the age of 25, had $256 million.
It was useful was it got more money so that the company called Brown. The shares went to sale in December the 1918 and they were popular and the price on the one to the Apple Macula was going to Apple in the early the 1977 the company was over 539. On the end of the 98 was award $1.79 billion. Some people on Apple could say from the 10 one at time, 100 people in the company suddenly become millionaires. Steve, an age at 25, had two, $256 million.
Steve gave some of his money to his parents, but he didn't share much of it. He didn't spend very much either. He bought a nice car, a very expensive music player, and a huge house. But he couldn't find the perfect furniture for the house, so the house stayed almost empty.
Steve
The
got,
newspapers loved the young Steve Jobs. The face
uh,
of the USA
Steve gained some of this money, this planet parent, but did share much of it. He spent very much after the home, a nice car, a very expensive multiplayer, and the house. But the cost of finding perfect furniture for the house to the house, time almost
most
paying
successful
empty.
company since the 1950s. He appeared on the cover of several magazines and became Silicon Valley's most famous name.
The newspaper loved the John Steve Jobs face of the USA for useful company science in the 1950. He appears on the cover of several magazines on the became Silicon Valley and most famous name. Thank you, teacher, for ask for my video I'm watching, and the next chapter for. Bye.